Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the Intrepid Global Citizen Podcast. We have a very special guest today. His name is Josh Day, and he's a close friend of mine because we cycled together in Russia and Mongolia for a week plus. And he's got some epic stories to tell. 2 years on the bicycle, 25,000 plus kilometers, a scorpion in the tent, no wolves in Russia and Siberia, and a lot of fun adventures. So welcome to the podcast, Josh Day and Cycling for Days. That's 726 days to be exact, right? On that trip. So
I'm glad you're counting. Cheers. Very happy to be here.
Yeah. Good. So it's good to see you again after 3 years. It's it's been a long time, but we'll do some catching up as we talk about Josh's story here as well. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself for the audience, just a quick introduction.
Sure, yeah. So as you say, my name's Josh. I'm from a small village in the southwest of England called Cheddar. And in 2017, I decided to cycle to Beijing from my hometown. And 2 years later, I made it. In 2019, on May the 14th, I arrived in Tiananmen Square in Beijing. As you say, 25,000 kilometers, summer, spring, autumn, winter, all the conditions through the bike. And yeah, it was the trip of a lifetime. And that's basically been my life since, just getting out on the bike, getting outdoors as much as possible, and just exploring nature on the bike.
Nice. So tell us a little bit about your hometown too. I mean, where did this desire for adventure come from? Cheddar is known for cheese too, right? That's the cheddar cheese that everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
So how is the cheese in your hometown, and how does that relate to wanting to get out there on the bike?
Cheese and cider, I think, is what we've got down there. So my parents have always been outdoorsy, and for as long as I can remember, I've been dragged up mountains by my dad, who would not take no for an answer. But the cycling really only became a passion of mine when I got to university, and I had a bit of independence, and didn't have a car because I couldn't afford one because I was a skint student, and just started cycling around really, and quickly found that the freedom you get on a bicycle is just unlike any other. I discovered you can go wherever you want, you can camp wherever you want. And the first bike tour I did was around Norway for 2 weeks with some university friends. We cycled up and down the fjords, camped anywhere because you can camp anywhere in Norway. And that first trip just set off that spark of discovery, really. And since then, I've done bigger and better trips. But yeah, my parents I've got a lot to thank to them. Their honeymoon, they spent cycle touring around Ireland. So it really is in our family and in our blood.
Wow, that's great. Come from a family of adventurers too, and I read on your blog too that your dad, it sounds like, has some mountaineering experience too, because in the Pamir you were using a technique for breathing that he taught.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so he's spent a bit of time mostly in Scotland, but in the French Alps as well, just doing some mountaineering. And I think these things just rub off on you. It's inevitable, if you see him going out with ice axe and crampons, and you think, well, okay, if Dad can do it, then that'll be me in a few years' time. I just can't wait to get out there and do it.
Wow, is he still doing that?
His body's letting him down a bit now, so he's very much on the cycling train now. So yeah, he just cycles, and he does bike tours of his own, although slightly more luxuriously than me. He doesn't camp in the tents anymore, more credit card touring, but yeah, he still gets out there and does these really long cycles, which is great to see.
Wow, that's awesome. And have you gone on any trips with your dad on the bike, like any tour cycling adventures together?
Unfortunately not. That would be a great thing to do. we've done lots of day rides together. So around the sort of hills and lanes of Somerset, near my hometown, there's lovely cycling around there, and in Scotland as well. But yeah, we should do an overnight tour actually. It's just a
Oh,
great. I mean, we always enjoy our rides together. I rarely get the chance to talk with Dad that much, but when we're on the bike, we can just spend time together talking about everything or nothing.
okay. And your siblings, are they also into adventure? And I know you met up with your brother in for
Yeah,
the
in
World
Georgia,
Cup,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, and the
Uh,
World Cup, yeah.
yeah.
So in their own way, they are. My older brother Tom, he lives in the Lake District in England, which is sort of the outdoor centre of England, really. And he runs up and down hills all day for fun. And yeah, my other brother likes an adventure as well. He does a lot of hiking, so we hiked around the mountains of Georgia and Armenia together. And my sister she's getting into it. She's a bit younger, but yeah, she's does cycles and hikes, and we go camping together in Scotland. So a very outdoorsy family.
Yeah, nice, nice. And so after university, you moved to London, right, for work?
Mm.
And so how was your life in London? I mean, how did you feel? You had this love for the outdoors, a trip to Norway and university, and how was it like this
Yeah,
change
so
for you?
London is a great city for a lot of things, but being outdoors is not one of them. And I spent 2.5, almost 3 years there. And as that time progressed, I just found I was spending more and more of my time, more and more of my weekends, just getting out of the city as much as possible. And it's quite funny. You get, especially in this country, you get lulled into this pattern. You go to school, you go to university, you get your job, you start your career, and then I could see the next 10, 15, 20 years of my life ahead of me. You know, living in London, climbing up the career ladder, maybe get married, move out a little move out a little bit more, start a family. And I just thought this is so boring. I need something different. So and I think that the moment for me was I was doing some work up in Milton Keynes, which is not a great place in England, and I was spending 5 days a week there, living out of hotels, doing this quite well-paid corporate job, coming back to a flat in London that was expensive to rent, that I was only there for 2 days a week. And then when I had those 2 days, I would go off to the hills or the mountains anyway. And I just thought, this is ridiculous. I need a change in my life. And it was that moment that I thought, okay, I need to do something different. I didn't necessarily think cycle to China there, but that was the seed.
Wow, wow. And yeah, so it sounds like you were going on some weekend adventures there. And so what was it that made you say, okay, I'm going to go on this multi-year adventure for all the way to Beijing? What was like the
Well, I didn't
decision,
think it would
wet
take.
seal decision?
I didn't think it would take 2 years, to be honest. I thought, well, I'll cycle to Beijing, and if it doesn't go well, I can always come back and start my job again. But yeah, the seed was just this: seeing the rest of the next 10 years of my life stretching before me, and thinking, I want something different. I need something different. Or, I want to see a bit more of this world, and the bike was the obvious choice for that, because I'd been on a couple of bike tours. My holidays were always on the bike, and I thought, well, if I can go on a bike holiday for a year and just cycle and eat every day, that's basically my dream life.
Cycle and eat, it doesn't get much better than
Yeah.
that. Right? Yeah, definitely. I have a similar experience working in Detroit after university and got the corporate job. Everybody thought, wow, you're so successful. Had a steady girlfriend, and why don't you get married in a year or two? And I was in my mid 20s and just thought the world is a big place and what am I doing? And yeah, then moved to Korea, and the rest is history. So I can definitely it. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and then it's it's interesting you chose to go to Beijing. I mean, how did you choose that route? The world is such a big place. You could have cycled the Americas or gone across Africa, or how did you choose Beijing?
Yeah. So I'm not particularly organized as a person. And I thought if I need to start booking flights and finding or getting a boat or getting myself to a destination, this is never going to happen. I want to make this as simple as possible. And I thought, where's the furthest I can get to from my front door? And I looked at a map and I thought, well, the other side of the world, Asia, Beijing, that's about as far as I can get if I just set off from my front door. And then I don't need to worry about planning anything. I just get on my bike, get my stuff together and go. And that's probably the highest chance of me actually doing this. Because if I have to book flights and sort of that sort of travel out, then I'm never going to do it. So it was all about making it as simple as possible for me to leave. And then Beijing seemed far away enough that I thought, well, if I get to there, I'll have had an adventure somehow. You know, the two places are far enough apart that whatever happens, something interesting will happen between the two. So it was not born of any great love of Beijing or China or interest. It was just, okay, let's look at a world map. Where's the furthest I can get to from my front door without having to take a plane or do any travel? So yeah, that was the reason, really.
Yeah. And if you look at the map, I was just looking at your blog yesterday and looking at the map, you didn't go in a straight line from Bristol to Beijing at all. Like, just for our listeners out there, I think it was for some cyclists, you know, they're really, that I met, tour cyclists, they're really focused on the goal of distance and speed and stats every day. But I feel like you did it more for the experience, right? And just sucking everything in and soaking it in and just really getting to know the places that you visited pretty well.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was all about the journey, and I would just follow my nose, really. And if I liked a place, I would stay there for as long as I liked. And if I didn't, I would move on. And yeah, I similarly to you, I met a lot of people who had planned almost to the day whether they were going to cycle and where they're going to camp. And I think you and me both are just not like that at all. We take each day as it comes and see where we end up that day, really. So I'm definitely in the latter. And yeah, I was stymied a bit by bureaucracy and visas and various seasonal issues, which did mean my route was rather more squiggly. I think when I worked it out, straight line distance, it's about 8,000 kilometers. So almost three times as long as it needed to be, my journey.
Yeah. You came, I think you went like to Turkey pretty much in a straight line, right? And then around Central Asia, you started to go north. And then instead of cycling through China, you chose to go to Russia, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
what was it that drew you to Russia instead of doing a long journey?
pure bureaucracy. So some people would think that getting a visa for China would be sensible if you are going to cycle to China. And I agree with those people, but I did not get a visa for China before I left. So I thought, oh, that's fine. I'll get one along the way. And I tried to get a Chinese visa in Turkey. I tried in Azerbaijan. I tried in Kazakhstan. I tried in Mongolia. And every time I got to the embassy, they said, nope, go back to the UK, apply there. That's where you can get the visa from. So yeah, if you look at my route, basically it's encircling the whole of China, because every time I tried to get in and knock on the door, they said no room, go back to your country and get the visa there. So yeah, I went up to Russia because that's the only visa I could get. Into Mongolia, I was going to go from Mongolia into China, but I couldn't get a visa for China there, so I had to go back out into Russia. And then from Russia into China, I couldn't get in, so I went across to South Korea. And then finally, I was able to get the visa and went in on the boat from South Korea. So I really did go in via the back door, as it were.
Yeah. It's so ironic that you had like such a tough time getting that Chinese visa, because I remember, you know, I live in Seoul, of course, and you stayed with me there, but it was just the easiest thing for me to get a Chinese visa. It was just fill out some paperwork
Yeah.
and here's my passport. And they even gave me a 10-year long visa for China. They said, I just wanted a few months. And they said, oh, by the way, we can give you 10 years if you want. Sure, why not? For our listeners out there that might want a Chinese visa, I don't know how it is now. Things have changed since then, but Seoul is a pretty good place.
Seoul's the place to go. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can vouch for that.
Yeah, so good. And so it sounds like your family they were probably pretty supportive of your trip, yeah? About you going to Beijing on the bike, or what was their reaction?
Yeah, so the first time I told my family was actually the year before that I left.
Mhm.
And I very dramatically said, right, I'm leaving, I'm going off on this big cycle. And to my credit, I spoke to my dad, and sorry, to his credit, and he said, well, have you actually saved any money? Have you actually planned anything? Do you even have a bike? Okay, no, and no to all of those. So he said, okay, well, if you're going to do it, that's fine. Just do it properly. Save up the money, get the bike, and really, then you can enjoy it. So they were supportive. If slightly surprised at the way I was going about it. So yeah, I think they were supportive. I mean, they were worried. I think there were certainly times that they wondered what I'd gotten myself into, and I didn't necessarily tell them everything that was happening, just to keep their worries at bay. But yeah, they were supportive, and that meant a lot to have that support.
Yeah, yeah. And you were working as an analyst, right, in London at the time. So
Yeah, exactly. I worked as a data analyst for various government departments. Did a project with Network Rail trying to make the trains run on time, which, spoiler alert, it failed because they're still they're still running very late in this country. But yeah, I mean, it was a good job. I enjoyed it, but it was just not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
yeah, yeah. And how were your coworkers when you told them that I want to quit this job and cycle to Beijing? I remember for me, quitting my corporate job as an engineer in Detroit, everybody thought I was nuts. I went backpacking in Mexico. They said, well, most people from Mexico, they want to come to the United States. And look at what you're doing. You're going to Mexico, and it's just
Yeah, going the wrong way.
But I mean, how was it with? I mean, your family sounds like is a bit.
Yeah, they were supportive. My coworkers, it was mixed. Some thought I was stupid. Some, I think, were quite jealous. Actually, they probably secretly wanted to do something like that, but couldn't for whatever reason, or didn't feel they were able to. So yeah, there was certainly a bit of jealousy, and but some were supportive. I think it, it, like in any place, you have the full range of emotions, and it'd be easy to say, oh, everyone said, oh, that's such a bad idea because they're in the corporate world, but that just wasn't true. There were some really supportive people, and yeah, some people thought, oh, you're stupid, you're at the start of the career, what are you doing taking years out? This is really the important time. But I had enough support to think it was the right decision.
Yeah, yeah, good. And so now, when you're getting ready for this journey, I mean, you think it's going to be a year long? I mean, did you do anything like a special training? Like, were you motivated to really get in shape or build up your endurance, or what was that?
I was doing a lot of cycling anyway. I cycled to work every day in London. On the weekends, I would go out cycling. So I had that kind of base endurance anyway. So for me, the fitness was never really a worry. It was more about everything else, about, okay, how do you wild camp? How do you deal with people who are trying to get you off your land? How do you deal with animals? I mean, in England, we have no wild animals really that are going to hurt you. Maybe an owl might land on your tent, but that's about it. So yeah, what am I going to do when I see animals? How am I going to get water, food? What happens if my bike breaks down? So the practical worries were more than the physical worries. I was pretty confident in my physical shape, actually, to be able to do this. But I wasn't particularly organized. I mean, I didn't have a bike. I only got the bike 2 weeks before I left on this trip. And I cobbled together some camping gear that I already had. I think I had some panniers from a previous tour. So it was all rather last minute. And I remember the day before I left, my phone broke. I thought, oh, this is not going to happen. So yeah, it was a rather haphazard leaving, shall we say?
Yeah, this sounds pretty familiar. For me, hitting the Pamir Highway was my first tour cycling experience on a secondhand bike that cost like $180. I had no idea how to do any repairs. Took a backpack with me with a $20 tent and didn't have enough warm clothes. It was total last minute ordeal. But
Well, they're the best adventures, aren't they?
yeah,
I don't think you will ever feel ready for a trip like that. There's always going to be that nagging voice saying, oh, what about this? What about that? What about whatever? So you've just got to go for it.
yeah, there's always more gear to buy. And if you
Mhm.
meet somebody on the road too, they see you without your phone and they think, or if you don't have panniers, if you have a backpack, it's like they think you're kind of nuts, or everybody's got their own standard, I guess, about what's
Yeah.
necessary for their trip, right? So what were the first few days like? I mean, that must have been really an experience to know that, okay, I'm leaving my doorstep, going to Beijing. This is the first day, the first few days. I mean, what were the first few days like?
With every bike tour I've ever done, there's a moment after the dust settles and the panic has all sort of stopped and you've cycled away, and about 10 minutes in and you're on the bike with all your gear and you think, wow, this is actually happening. This is after all the planning and all the noise that goes on beforehand, and you get that moment of pure adrenaline and excitement to think, yes, this is finally happening. And I can still remember that moment. I can remember the stretch of road that I was on when that happened. I was not thinking about Beijing at all. That was just so far away that I couldn't even comprehend. I was thinking about trying to get to my gran and granddads who lived 10 miles away. So day one was just get out the front door and get to my gran and granddads. And if I can do that, if I've left my front door behind, then I know I can complete the rest of this trip. So that was really how I felt just at the start. And then the first few days was good fun, very exciting. And then I spent a lot of the time thinking, wow, this bike is heavy. Do I really need all this stuff? And England is a lot hillier than I remember. But yeah, that initial excitement is just a feeling I love, and I get that on any trip that I do. Just when you're finally there, those first few steps on a long hike, the first few pedal strokes of a bike ride, or that plane ride if you're just going on traveling, backpacking, where it finally comes together and you think, yes, this is happening.
Yeah, sure. And it sounds like you took a lot of stuff with you. So if you could do it over again and you're leaving tomorrow from your doorstep, what would you leave behind that you took with you on that?
Oh, all sorts. Yeah. You don't need 3 or 4 pairs of underwear. You barely need one. I took a SAS survival guide, which was like how to survive in the wild, which was completely useless. Massive first aid kit that I didn't know how to use half of it. All sorts of cycling spares. I took a massive backpack that just in case I went hiking, but you can just use a pannier and sling that around your shoulder. So I think there was just scores of stuff. I remember going to my grandparents and going through all these things and thinking, well, this is, why the heck have I taken this with me? Yeah, clothes, loads of clothes. I mean, the thing about kit is it changes so much depending on where you are. And when you're going such a long distance to Beijing and through all 4 seasons, your kit requirements will be changing constantly. So in Europe, you barely need anything at all, but in Mongolia, if something goes wrong, you need to be able to fix it yourself. So there's a lot of variation there, I guess. And the main thing about kit is being adaptable to what the needs of your situation require.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you definitely need to be able to fix things yourself in Mongolia, as I learned the hard way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I had a 4-day sequence when I was there, but just everything seemed to go wrong. The first day, my tent pole snapped in a thunderstorm. So my tent collapsed around me. So I didn't have any tent. And then the next day, I was sleeping under the stars, and my stove stopped working, so I couldn't cook dinner. So the next day, I was sleeping under the stars and cooking my food on an open fire. And then my roll mat broke, so I didn't have anything to sleep on. And then the fourth day, I'm sleeping under the stars on the bare ground, cooking over an open fire. And I was then cycling along, and my chain completely snapped in half. So it was just a 4-day series of unfortunate events that just bit me right in the ass. And I thought, wow, this is tough.
Yeah, masterclass in patience, right? And minimalism, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah. And they were really resourceful there. And I found that in a lot of countries in Asia, just the willingness to try and mend and adapt. Whereas in this country, you'd call for help. I remember when you and I first camped that first night, and I don't know if you remember that car that had broken down next to us, and they were fixing it all night, but they did it in the end. It took them 4 hours or something, but they did it and they fixed it. Whereas in this country, in England, you just ring up someone and someone would come and tow it away or fix it for you, but they fixed it themselves.
Yeah, it's just patience and persistence to keep going, and and keep working on the problem throughout the night too. Yeah, that's pretty incredible. Yeah, I remember in Ulgi in Mongolia, it took me like 3 or 4 days just to fix my spoke, to find the right person. And at the end of it, they had to tie 2 spokes together because they hadn't seen a tire with the diameter of a North American mountain bike
Yeah,
before, right?
that
So
was the best
two
fix I've
spokes
ever
together.
seen in my life.
Yeah,
2 spokes, one from each end, interlaced together in the middle to hold the wheel tight, and it worked.
yeah. And I brought that back to my bicycle mechanic in South Korea and showed him, and his eyes were just like wide with disbelief. Like, what happened here? Let me give you a real spoke here. And he's like, how much did that cost you? And I said, oh, maybe about 50 cents or so. He's like, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to charge you like $20 for this job. I'm so sorry. It's the funny things that happen on the road, right?
Yeah, just goes to show
Yeah,
you can get over anything with a bit of ingenuity.
right, for sure. So how long do you think it took you to get used to this new way of life, being on the road?
Probably a few weeks, maybe even a month, because up until that point, it just feels like a holiday, and you feel like, oh, I'm on a bike tour, but I'll be going back to my quote unquote normal life soon, and it didn't really feel like an actual lifestyle change. The other thing is my saddle was really sore, so I had a saddle sores, which is the bane of any cyclist's life, really, because I was so unorganized. I'd bought a new saddle just before I left, and I hadn't broken it in yet. So that took a lot of getting used to. But I think once I'd got to Istanbul and Turkey, and unfortunately I broke up with my girlfriend in that city, and that was a big tie back to my previous life. And once that tie had gone, I felt a lot more free, and I felt like, okay, this is actually my life. This is not just a break from my normal life, but cycle touring is my normal life now. And that was quite a liberating feeling, actually, to think, okay, well, this is my life and I can do it how I want. I don't need to hurry through Europe. I don't need to rush anywhere. So yeah, I think it took about maybe 3 or 4 weeks, a month to really get used to it as a lifestyle.
Okay. Did you feel like that breakup like helped you mentally at least know that you could take your time with the trip?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a shame, but it also freed me in many ways. And I think on a trip like that, it's better to be single, so that your mind can focus on the real experiences that you're having here and now, and not thinking back to where you were before. You really want to be in the moment when you're cycling, and not worrying about when am I next going to be online so I can text someone, or give someone a ring or update them. So yeah, it was necessary, I think, for the trip, and I don't regret it.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Good. And how was it in Europe, cycling? You'd cycled through Europe before, right?
I'd done small trips in Scandinavia and France. Yeah, I enjoyed cycling in Europe. I did hurry through because it's quite expensive, and I thought, well, I can cycle around France or Switzerland when I'm in my 50s or 60s, and it's close to home. Whereas I wanted to get through it and get to the good stuff, which was sort of Central Asia and Russia and China and the Caucasus. So yeah, I did hurry through Europe quite a bit. I mean, Europe is like a garden, really. Everything is organized and manicured, and there's no real wilderness there. So it's very pleasant, but not particularly exhilarating. But actually, for my trip, it was perfect because it is quite easy to cycle there. It meant that I could warm up and get used to the rigors of cycle touring in a quite safe and easy environment. So for me, it worked out really well. I really enjoyed seeing the contrasts, but also similarities in Europe. So by the time I got to the end of Europe and Bulgaria and went into Turkey, it felt very different from, say, France. And if you flew straight from France to, say, Bulgaria, you would think, wow, these are really, really different countries. But when you're on the bike and you see each country sort of merge and smudge into each other, you realize, okay, well, Bulgaria's got similarities with Serbia, and Serbia has similarities with Hungary before that, and Hungary to Slovakia, and Slovakia to Austria, and Austria to Germany, and Germany to France. And suddenly you've crossed a whole continent, and the extremes are very different, but actually it's more of a continuum, and you can see the differences kind of smudged into each other. So I really enjoyed that, the feeling of seeing those changes, those slow changes as I moved across the continent.
Sure, sure. And then you made it to Turkey. And I think I remember reading in your blog that you felt like, okay, now when you were in Asia, like this is the real like test or the real start for you.
Absolutely, yeah. So like I said, Europe was quite tame, and then I got to Istanbul and everything was different. The food was different, the water was different. I woke up at 5 in the morning, there was a mosque calling out the call to prayer, which is something that I never heard before. And the people looked different, and the language sounded so alien to me. And yeah, I just thought, wow, this is the first time I really felt a long way from home, but in a really exciting way.
Okay. And then you went along the Black Sea, right, in Turkey. So how's that route along the Black Sea?
Well, the Black Sea was my second choice. Ideally, I would have liked to go through Cappadocia and seen some of the mountains of Turkey, but I arrived in July and it was just too hot. I mean, I'm a northwestern European. I'm not used to anything above 25 degrees Celsius. So when it was sort of getting up to 35, 38, 39, it was just a bit too much for me. So I went to the sea because I thought would be cooler, and it was great. It was surprisingly hilly, but it was a good introduction to the Turkish culture, to the small towns and villages that line the seaside. I started sleeping in mosques and napping there, and found the I had my first taste of the Muslim sense of pilgrimage. So, and their appreciation of someone taking a long pilgrimage. So there was water in every village, and I slept on the carpets of the mosques, which were really cool inside in the midday sun. So I really enjoyed Turkey. I met a few guys when I was there, a few cyclists who they were really interesting fellows. They were anarchists, or so they told me. That was their sort of political ideologue, and they were sort of very anti-government, anti-organized government. And I think cycle touring fitted into their ideology. They would cycle anywhere and camp anywhere, and take any fruit that they could find on trees, and thought, well, this doesn't belong to anyone. This is just fruit that's free for everyone to eat. So yeah, they were a curious bunch. But I really enjoyed the companionship of cycling, and it was something I hadn't really experienced in Europe so much. But those sort of chance encounters where you meet someone cycling the same direction to you, and you think, okay, should we cycle together? Yeah, sure, let's do it. And some of the best people I met on my whole trip have been fellow cyclists that have cycled together with me. Of course, counting you as one of them, George.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's a fun story. Yeah, when I was in Turkey too, I met quite a few Turkish cyclists exploring their country. And
yeah, well, one of the cyclists of this trio, he had done a cycle trip around every single province of Turkey. I think it took him almost a year, 17,000 kilometers. But I mean, what a great way to see your own country, just to cycle around every single province. It's something I'd love to do in the UK one day. I don't know how long it would take. Bit shorter than America, perhaps.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I met a Turkish guy that I cycled with too for a few days there. He was trying to set up a tour cycling like business, like to take tourists, and he was really trying to explore every inch and centimeter of his country and scout places to go. And it was pretty inspiring. He was just taking it really slow, just going for several years. He'd been there, and then another guy that I couldn't really communicate with. It was kind of had that anarchist mentality. Every time we'd camp, he'd say, "Look at this land over here. Look, that belongs to everybody. Why do we should be able to camp there?" And taking fruit off the olives from the trees everywhere. This is
exactly. Well, my friend, he was a really quick cyclist, and he would cycle up the road to forage ahead for berries. And then the three of us would arrive, and his hands would be overflowing with hazelnuts or berries that he'd scrumped. Yeah, I think there's a strong anti-government feeling, I think, among some of the cyclists in Turkey, and I respect that, because I'm also of the opinion that camping is a right, and you should be able to camp in lots of different places. Okay, not in someone's backyard, but generally, if it's just common land owned by the people, then why not camp there?
Yeah, sure. In Turkey, it's got a lot going on too. I mean, when I was there was ISIS in the south and the border with Iraq, and the issue with Kurdistan, and I missed a terrorist attack by like 2 days in Istanbul. There was a terrorist, like a bombing in Sultan Ahmed in the main square in Istanbul, like
Crumbs.
3 days after I visited that like same area. And so I was just reflecting like, wow, if I would have been there 2 days later, and a bunch of tourists were killed, like that could have been me. But anyway, there's a lot going on. One guy I stayed with, he was protesting, and I think the issue with Kurdistan and the conflict,
Yeah, certainly the guy I was cycling with, Ozzy, he'd been a conscientious objector in the 90s. So they have compulsory military service in Turkey, and he'd objected. And because of that, he'd been sent to prison and had his basically rights taken away from him. And he was effectively a prisoner in his own country. He couldn't get any social security. He couldn't be involved within the society because he didn't have the right ID. But he didn't have a passport either because that was taken away. So he couldn't leave the country. So he was effectively a prisoner in his own country. And yeah, his story was quite harrowing, really. And he had friends who were lawyers and protesters, and they really struggled under the recent regime change with Erdogan sort of tightening his authoritative grip on the country. It's a scary place to be if you don't agree with what the government are doing.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. And then so you cycled up the Black Sea,
Mm-hmm.
and then you went up to Georgia. So how was it in your blog? It seems like you really have special feelings for Georgia as well. So
I love Georgia. If people ask me what was my favorite country on the whole trip, I normally say Georgia. It was a breath of fresh air. Eastern Turkey is quite conservative. So when I got to Georgia and people were, drinking wine and partying, and people were on the beaches sunbathing and just having a great time, and I thought, wow, this is my kind of place. Georgia as a country is incredible. It's got mountains, it's got desert, it's got seaside, it's got a sort of wine region, which is like Tuscany, where they make all this amazing Georgian wine. And the people there know how to have a good time. Their Georgian friendliness and hospitality is legendary. And you can't pitch your tent without someone coming along and saying, no need to pitch your tent. Come to my house. And here's some food, here's some wine, stay for as long as you want. And I found that from almost day one in Georgia. I tried to pitch my tent by this bridge by a river, and it seemed a nice spot. And this guy Gotcha comes down and says, no, house. And we stayed there and drank his homemade cha-cha, which is Georgian homebrew, all night long. And yeah, I have a very fond memories of Georgia. The food there is fantastic. If you're into your cheese and your bread, then it's perfect. They have this thing called khachapuri, which is cheese bread, and it's bread stuffed with cheese, with more cheese, and cheese on top of it. They have these things called kinkali, which are dumplings, and steamed dumplings with meat or potato or cheese inside. Oh, I adore Georgia. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I saw a picture on your blog too, where you said you were bulking up. You said
Yeah.
you've been like a skinny guy your whole life, and
Yeah,
now
exactly.
you're finally putting on some weight. And it's a picture with you in front of like just a bunch of bread and beer.
Yeah. That's pretty much how I spend my time in Georgia. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so you put on some kilograms. That was in Georgia, yeah?
Yeah, I did. Well, I also did some volunteering there. So I was trail building up in the Caucasus Mountains. So swinging a pickaxe and digging with a shovel, which I think put some meat on the bone as well. Not just using my legs for once.
Yeah, how was that? You mentioned that it was quite a change doing manual labor, right? So how was that experience physically and just being there with other volunteers?
Yeah, it was a great experience. There was about 10 of us, and we were up at this camp for 2 weeks and just getting up every day, building some trail, moving rocks around, coming back and eating and sitting by the fire and going to sleep. And there's a lot of times in life where simplicity is just the best thing that you need in your life. And after the breakup in Turkey and all the sort of cycling that I'd done and political discussions and all that sort of thing, then just a couple of weeks where you know what your only task is for the day. is to build some trail. And there's something very pleasing in that simplicity. The group were great. There was a quite a mix of people, some doing full-time jobs, some on their travels, some sort of retirees. It was quite a mix of countries and different backgrounds. But we all came together and worked towards this common goal of building a trail. And yeah, I still stay in touch with quite a few of them now. It was a great experience, really.
Nice. What kind of trail was this, in the Caucasus Mountains, or was it?
Yeah, so they're trying to build a hiking trail called the Trans-Caucasian Trail, and the idea is to span the length of the whole Caucasus Mountains, which are some of the highest in Europe, even higher than the Alps. So yeah, the idea is to have two trails, one going west to east across Georgia and Azerbaijan, and another one through the lesser courses going north to south through Armenia and up into Georgia. So I was up in the Georgian one, working on the west to east trail. And it's pretty much complete. I think if people want to go and do a through hike of it, they can now, and I would thoroughly recommend doing it.
Wow, that's awesome. So that must be satisfying. One day you can go back there and
absolutely, and step on the
yeah
steps that I put in, or walk across a bridge that we helped to build over a river. Yeah, it's very satisfying to see that completion.
Wow, you built a bridge also there then?
Yeah, out of wood. We, with the help of this local man called Valery, who owned a sort of cabin near the trail, and it was this big bear of a man, probably in his 70s, and he just came down and was wielding this massive axe, just with one hand, chopping down trees and chopping up the wood that we were going to use for the bridge. He was quite a character. In his house, he had this big bear skin and on his wall, and he's like, yeah, that's the bear I had to kill when he came to my cabin. So yeah, Valery, the bear slayer.
Wow. Sounds like a legend that I would definitely like to connect with. I'm in Georgia one day. Wow.
Absolutely.
So how is this bridge? I mean, some of the countries we get at, like the standards for a bridge are pretty different. Some of them can be just a few logs like put together and that's it. Others can be a little bit more, elaborate.
This was definitely in the former. This was okay, here's the crossing, here's some trees, let's cut them down, make some logs, strap them together, and that will do. But it was good fun. It was one log in the middle and then a couple suspended either side with some rope between the two, and then some rope pulling it down at the other end. So it was a simple structure, but it seems strong. I'd like to go back 5 years later and see if it's still standing.
Yeah. So you could use you're a physics major too, right? And
I am, yeah.
Yeah. So you could use some of your science and technical skills there for.
It could do. I think I was trumped by Valery's years of experience and else.
Sure. Yeah, that's what I find. Nothing beats experience, right? Out there.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. So then your border crossing experience, I got a good kick out of that with I think it was Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Yeah, that's correct. So I was going from Georgia to Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan and Armenia have been fighting a war since 1991, actually, for various bits of land in the Caucasus. So you can't cross between the two. And I'd been to Armenia briefly with my brother when he came and met me. We went on a little trip there. And then I was cycling from Georgia into Azerbaijan. And I got to the border post and all was fine. Gave them my passport and we made some small talk. And then I saw the bodyguard's face fall and he looks up at me and says, "Oh, you've been to Armenia." And I was thinking, oh gosh, here we go. So yeah, they they took me aside for some questioning. Wanted to know why I'd been to Armenia before Azerbaijan and not the other way around, which I innocently said, well, that was the way my route went, but that was not a sufficient answer for them. They started questioning me about what I'd bought in Armenia and whether I'd taken any of it back. And I didn't really know how to answer him. So I went into great detail and told him that I'd bought pizza. And that confused him quite a lot. I think he was expecting cigarettes or alcohol or something similar. But yeah, that was a bit rocky. We just had a lot of questioning, and like in all border posts, they know that they have the power and they're in control, and they will make you feel like they have the power and are in control. And it is one of those times where you just need to put your ego aside and say, okay, I know I have all my documents here. You can let me in. But after about an hour, I think they got bored and eventually let me in. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Good. And where? And then after you crossed the border, it looked like you met with a bunch of guys, and they were like, "Hey, come have tea." And
Yeah, exactly.
all over.
And unfortunately, I'd posted a photo of Armenia on my social media, and again, they were they weren't sure about that. But yeah, these road workers, they just invited me across to eat tea and were really friendly about it. So it just goes to show, you can get a first impression from a border post, and it's nothing like the rest of the country.
Sure, sure. What would you say was your most memorable border crossing experience?
There was one when I crossed from Kazakhstan into Russia. That was quite funny because the way I'd got into Russia was I'd bought tickets for the World Cup, and with that you got given this fan ID, which was essentially your visa. And I arrived at this really remote border post between Kazakhstan and Russia, and I don't think they get many people, let alone foreigners, on their bikes. And I arrived, and then I gave them my passport, and then I gave them this fan ID as my visa. And I could see this excitement because they'd clearly been told by, all the border posts have been told, all right, if you get someone who's coming to the World Cup, you have to scan their fan ID. And they got all very excited. And then there was posters on the wall saying, oh, right, yeah, you've got one of these, you've got one of these. They didn't have a clue how to use it. So they were ringing up and down the chain of command saying, okay, we've got someone with a fan ID. But he's not got his tickets because I was going to pick up my tickets later. And then it was just kind of clueless. And then at the end, they'd finally figured out how to do it. I think after about an hour of phoning their superiors in Moscow. And then they all came out, about 5 of them, saluted me, which I didn't really know what to do. So I gave a sort of half-hearted salute back. And at the same time, in unison, said, "Welcome to Russia." It was it was quite a memorable border crossing.
Nice, nice. So they did get their first fan crossing at that border.
Probably first and only, I should imagine.
Yeah, right. Nice, nice. All right, and then so it seemed like you arrived in Uzbekistan and you felt like, all right, this is it, and especially Samarkand. And you cycled through the desert, right? In October, was it? In the fall?
Yeah, it was actually a really nice time to be in the desert. It was probably about 25 degrees Celsius and nice sunny days, but not too hot. The desert cycling is something I'd really encourage anyone to do, actually. I know some people take the trains to skip those parts, but it's just an amazing experience. The road is just perfectly straight, and you just see it going off into the distance and until you can't see it anymore. And you know that just for the next 3 or 4 days, you're just going to be following the same road, straight, straight, straight. There's nothing on either side. You're just you and your thoughts alone. And that is a real test, more than a mental test more than anything else. It's just, how do you keep your mind occupied? And you think of everything and nothing and everything in between. But it's a real calming experience. And especially camping in the desert is just an absolute joy. You wheel your bike off the side, just pitch your tent, and there's nothing around. Maybe the far off distant wail of a train on its own journey. The sun slowly fades, and then all the stars come out, and you've got a sort of million stars above you, and just absolute stillness. It was some of the best cycling times of my life, actually, cycling through that desert. It's an absolute joy.
Nice. And how do you keep your mind occupied or on these long distances between towns or villages when there's nothing there? You just kind of let it run, or do you
I let it run. I had a MP3 player, so I would sometimes listen to podcasts or sometimes listen to music, but a lot of the times you just kind of see where your mind goes. And sometimes you'll go into big trails of thoughts about life and really big topics and relationships and family and jobs and all that. And sometimes you might think about what you had for dinner yesterday, or whether your tire is on correctly, or what that noise is coming from your bike. I mean, it's really, you think of everything from the big to the small, and sometimes just nothing, and that's also quite a thing to do as well. I guess if you are finding yourself going into strange thoughts that you don't like, then I think mindful cycling is something that you could do in those situations, is to really focus on the sensation of cycling along, because there really is nothing else to distract you. Just to focus on your legs going up and down, or the feeling of your hands on the bar, or the feeling of your saddle and the vibrations going through. So that was something that I did occasionally if I felt my thoughts were going to places that I didn't want them to.
Oh wow, mindful cycling, that's interesting. Like cycling meditation, that's exactly like the meditation technique that I do every morning.
Well, this is I started doing that in Mongolia, really, which was after I met you. So that was definitely from the George Valarezo playbook, that one.
Oh, nice. Glad. And how was it doing that technique? Did you?
Yeah, really good. I skipping ahead from Uzbekistan to Mongolia, I was not in a brilliant place mentally, because I just finished the World Cup and I'd been with all my friends and just having this great party. And then in Mongolia, which, as I already said, was really tough. It's a really unforgiving environment, and my thoughts were just going to some really bad places, and I just wanted to clear that and refocus. And I found just the focus of breathing and mindfulness and focusing just on your sensations was just brilliant for bringing me back to the here and now, rather than getting lost on these trails of thought that I didn't want to be on.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing, I found about meditation is like we all have these crazy thoughts, and our mind goes in places we don't want it to go sometimes, but we aren't those thoughts. We can choose to accept them or to reject them, so and to become aware of those thoughts is a skill in and of itself.
Exactly, and something that I'm still very much working on. I feel I'm only just starting the path of mindfulness, but something I try to do more and more.
Yeah, the path never ends, that's for sure. There's always more time to meditate, and I think for me, that's the beauty of tour cycling is you're alone for long stretches, and then you have this time in your tent in the morning or at nighttime, or if you want to take a break, and it's the perfect way to pass time. Just sit in your tent and focus on your breath or focus on your sensations, and then it puts me at least more in the moment and helps me enjoy my surroundings. So yeah, I'm glad you could use that in Mongolia.
Thanks for that.
And so then moving back to Uzbekistan, you said you really felt like Samarkand was the place for you. You really arrived at this place you've been kind of fantasizing for so long. And tell us.
Yeah, I first read about Samarkand years ago, and this guy, Alistair Humphreys, who a lot of people, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners will know about, and he wrote about this place in his book, and it just sounded miles away. And I thought anyone who gets there, they're a real adventurer, you know. And I found myself, you know, outside this amazing Registan complex, which is in the middle of the city, with these amazing sort of 100 feet high madrasas with their big minarets and their blue domes and their mosaic walls, and everything about it just screamed Silk Road adventures and history and all that sort of feeling. And I thought, wow, this is great. I've got here by myself on my bike, and I'm miles away from home, but this is it. I'm really going on adventures that I never thought I'd do. So yeah, Samarkand was that place for me. It really epitomized a lot of those feelings that I had.
Wow. And how were the people in Uzbekistan?
The Uzbek people were really friendly, really friendly. It was my first real taste of kind of openness and generosity that I hadn't. Even in Georgia, it was slightly different there. I got invited in, you know, to stay with random strangers. It's not like I'd approach them. They would just see me cycling around the street and say, "Hey, what are you doing? Come in, have a cup of tea, have some food, have some vodka, have some whatever." When I got to the end of Uzbekistan, I was trying to buy some scarves in a market, and this guy came over and said, "Oh, you know, what do you want? I will help you, give you a good price." And he helped me get some scarves, and then we sat down to eat. And he said, "Oh, my name is Zio. I am the best chef in Denov." Denov was the city that I was staying in that night. And he said, "What do you want to eat?" And we ate some bread and drank some vodka. And then he said, "Oh, where do you want to stay?" And I said, "Oh, I'm looking for a hotel actually." And he said, No, you can't stay in my house." So he invited me back to his house, and he cooked this plov, which is an Uzbek dish, big plov, like it's a big plate of meat and rice and onion and egg. And we sat down and ate this big plov and started drinking some vodka, by which time he had an upgrade. He was no longer the best chef in Denov. He was the best chef in the whole region. And then we had some barbecue and some shashlik, which is barbecued meats, and then some more vodka. And then finally we went to bed, by which time he was the best chef in all of Uzbekistan. But the next morning we woke up slightly hungover, and I was about to leave, and he, just before I was about to leave, he gave me a gift of, you know, this hat and scarf and tunic, and said, "You know, Josh, I want you to have this." And it was just fantastic and emblematic of all the generosity I'd received in Uzbekistan. You know, countless people just giving me little bits of food or drink, or letting me stay nearby in their house or camp in their garden. It was a fantastic country.
Yeah, for sure. Uzbekistan hospitality, it's something different too. And even in different parts of the world, like in Russia by Lake Baikal, I remember cycling and asking like a guard by an apartment complex if I could camp somewhere in the area. And he was from Uzbekistan. He said, no, you're coming with me. You're not sleeping outside. And I was like, no, it's a perfect evening. Look, there's a lake right here. I really like to sleep outside. And no, he wouldn't take no for an answer.
Yeah.
And we slept in this little room, and he cooked for me and brought his friends over, and we all had a big party there, and he just wouldn't take no for an answer. Just hospitality is.
That's so generous. Yeah, it's fantastic. And it's something that I've been trying to bring back into my life, you know, now. But it's not easy, but yeah, which makes it even more impressive, the generosity that they give.
Yeah. And so you were cycling in the desert in Uzbekistan, and I remember there was a story about the scorpion. So was that in the desert in Uzbekistan where the scorpion was?
That was in Kazakhstan, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I was in the steppe of Kazakhstan, and I got up in the morning, went, I think, to the loo, and came back to my tent, and lo and behold, there's a scorpion on my roll mat. Just chilling, having the time of his life. Uh, he was friendly enough. I managed to cajole him out the tent, and then he scuttled away. But yeah, that was a bit of a shock. I don't know how long he'd been there, whether we'd slept together all night or not.
Wow. He just went out of your tent on his own, or you had to?
I had to persuade him. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Did you think he might get angry and something might happen? Or?
Well, like I said, I mean, we don't have scorpions in England, and I have no idea how to deal with one. So I was very wary of him, but he seemed to be quite relaxed. I think he just wanted to get some shade in my tent, which I couldn't blame him for. So when I got him out, he just went and ran under a rock again.
All right, that's good. Yeah, if you respect the scorpion, he'll respect you. I mean, that's my philosophy. I don't know how.
Yeah, you can get a long way with animals
far, right?
with that philosophy. Yeah, exactly.
Just treat them nicely, and they'll treat you nicely, just like people, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So you survived that scorpion in your tent, luckily, and then the Pamir Highway. You get to the Pamir Highway, and it's December.
Yeah.
Usually, all the tour cyclists, they're in the summer months, but the Pamir Highway, how was it in the winter?
Yeah, Pamir Highway, second highest international highway in the world, goes up to 4,500 meters through the Pamir Mountains of Tajikistan, and this was one of the few places that I'd researched before my trip, and I really, really wanted to go there, but I'd spent too long in Georgia drinking wine and enjoying the summer months there, so I'd got there a bit late. And it was one of those real decision times where you think, okay, well, I've got a couple of options. I can either do it now. I can either wait until the next season, which is going to be, 7 months away in April, May next year, or I can not do it at all. And I thought, well, I have to try at least. So I went around the market in Dushanbe in Tajikistan and got as many warm clothes and some winter boots as I could. And I thought, well, I'll give it a go. And if it gets too cold or if I can't do it, then I'll come back. And the first couple of days were pretty tricky. For those that don't know, the Pamir Highway starts in earnest in a town called Khorog. And I left Khorog, and my first night camping, I pitched my tent and cooked some dinner, some pasta, and it was already below zero, and it was sort of freezing as I was eating it. This sort of pasta and tomato and egg. It was terrible. Anyway, I went to try and wash my pans out in the river, and I couldn't. No, I went wash them out, but the river was frozen. So I came back to my tent, and then I couldn't find my tent. It was crazy. I was just walking around the middle of Tajikistan when I was sort of -5, -6 at night, just with a pan in my hand, completely lost my tent. Thinking, I'm going to have to go and see a villager and knock on his door and turn up just with a pan. I didn't have my phone, didn't have any wallet or anything or any money. Eventually found my tent by tripping over my guidelines. And then I went into bed thinking, wow, this is, you're a real amateur, Josh. You're supposed to be going over the Pamir highways and you can't even camp properly. And I went to sleep, and then unfortunately that night I woke up and I had some terrible food poisoning. I think the frozen pasta or frozen tomato had not sat well in my stomach. So at about 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, I'm on all fours, expelling everything from, my body, and my thermometer showing -9, and the vomit is literally freezing on the ground in front of me, and I'm thinking, this is terrible. I can't carry on like this. That was a terrible introduction to below zero camping, I guess. And then it got slightly better from there. The next day, I managed to find my way to Jalondi Hot Springs, which is on the road, and pretty much collapsed there. Went into bed and took a rest day. And on my rest day, I sampled the local hot springs and hot baths. I was almost alone in that hotel. There was just a couple of guys staying there who were working on the road, and they took a very dim view of my plan to cycle over the Pamirs. They were telling me how I would freeze and how the wolves would get me in my tent, and I would run into all sorts of these disasters, which was not what I wanted to hear. And I think a lot of times people see you on a bike and see you as quite vulnerable, perhaps. They're used to traveling in cars or in buses or, inside, and they see you and think, well, that's the bike is what kids play with. If you're a man, you shouldn't be on a bike. You should be in a car or something. And there was certainly a bit of that with these workers in this hot spring hotel. But it's hard not to listen to those warnings. When a local man tells you there are wolves, then suddenly you start thinking you're seeing wolves everywhere. And I remember cycling through the Pamirs later the next day, having recovered after my rest day, and you looking over the horizon, trying to see if there are any wolves around that are going to come and jump for you and eat you when you're on your bike. So yeah, kind of scary.
Wow. And how is it like at nighttime? Because, you're not there. I'm sure there are not many wolves in England, right? Or Europe, or even Uzbekistan, or Turkey, where you had been before. And so you're in your tent alone at night, and
Yeah.
I mean, your mind can go crazy with these things, right? Like I remember camping in Africa for the first time ever and thinking, is that noise a lion? It's an elephant. I couldn't sleep for days on end. How was that? How was your?
Yeah, that's the exact same feeling. And I remember I was cycling along and it was getting quite late. Actually, the sun had already gone down, but I wanted to press on. And my head torch would just pick out the eyes of what were probably goats or sheep, by the side of the road. But you see these green eyes looking back at you and you think, oh my gosh, it's a wolf and he's out to get me. The imagination plays so many tricks on you. You just hear everything, and everything could be a wolf or someone coming to get you. The nights were pretty cold in the Pamirs. Fortunately, I managed to get to villages most times. So I was camping near villages or even staying with locals in their guest houses. But it was routinely below -10, and I'll be honest, I didn't sleep much. It's one of those times you get into bed and you're not really going to sleep. You just kind of lie down and try and make it through the night, really.
Yeah, and it's totally a different way of looking at it. We normally, here in the comfort of our homes, we get a night's rest and we feel good the next day and it's nice and comfortable. But when you're out there camping and you're listening to sounds, there might be wolves, there could be big winds keeping you up, or it's -10. You just have to get through it. It's like a hard task you have to get through, right?
It is. It's not a holiday anymore.
Yeah. Wow. So yeah, it was probably another fact that that nobody cycles the Pamir in the winter, right? So they probably hadn't seen anyone ever on the bike in the winter, so they figure you can't do it.
Yeah, exactly. I think that was the thought process. Is you just can't be done. But I did it, and I was quite pleased with that. And it just goes to show, if you're prepared, and I did prepare and took extra clothes and extra precautions. But if you're prepared and willing to risk something and having a bit of courage, then sometimes you can pull things off.
Yeah, and you on your blog too, at the end, I remember you had like these statistics, and one of them was wolves seen, and it was 0, right? And
Yeah.
in wolves heard, I don't think you heard any wolves either, any howls.
Didn't hear any wolves, didn't see any wolves. They're all in my imagination or in the minds of people warning me. Yeah. I'm sure they're out there somewhere, but didn't see any of them.
Yeah, the legendary wolves,
The
ghosts,
Pamir.
wolf ghosts out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same in Korea. I mean, you know how Korea is. It's a very comfortable place to cycle. You know, there's everything you need, food, water, people everywhere. But back in the day, 10 years ago, people would be like, you can't cycle like 100 kilometers away. You can't do it. It's impossible. Or you can't camp in the mountains. There's wild pigs there, and I just shake my head and I'm like, okay, like the pigs are friendly. I don't eat meat. I don't eat pork, so they won't have anything against me. So we'll be fine. Nothing's ever happened. I've had great times in the mountains and cycling in Korea, and now it's pretty common. But anyway, it reminded me of your Tajik story, or your Tajik story reminded me of that. So yeah, how is the altitude though? I mean, the Pamir Highway goes up to 4,600 meters, and I did it in the summertime, and it was tough for me. So I can't imagine.
Yeah, I've not experienced that altitude before or since actually, and it's a very strange thing for those who've not experienced it. You feel out of breath because there's less oxygen and there's less air. But the strange thing is it just doesn't come back. So normally if you're out of breath, you stop, you have a rest, and after 15, a few seconds or whatever, you recover and you feel like you can go again. But with the altitudes, I found I would be out of breath and I'd stop and I'd wait for that recovery, and it just didn't come. It just doesn't come. You're just constantly in that kind of recovery mode. So I found it really tricky, and it required a different way of cycling. And you alluded to it earlier, but my dad had taught me something that you break the journey up into lots of small steps. So I might be cycling along and I see a rock 100 meters away, and I think, right, okay, I'm going to get to that rock. That's all I care about at the moment. I'm just going to get to that rock. And once I get to that rock, then I'll have a short rest. And everything in my whole world was focused on cycling to that rock. And then once you get there, then you find another thing, 100 meters away. Okay, there's a signpost. I'll get up to that signpost. And in that way, you can slowly inch your way along. And 100 meters, turns into a kilometer, and then kilometer turns into 5 and 10. And before you know it, you eventually haul yourself up these mountain roads. But you have to have a way of doing it, because otherwise you'll just stand there waiting to recover, trying to recover your breath, and it just won't come. But it's a very strange feeling.
Okay. And were you able to keep your balance, or that you didn't feel sick at any time?
I didn't get any sickness. It was just a physical lack of energy and breathlessness that I felt. And after a few days, my body got used to it, and I felt fine. But those first couple of days was just bizarre. Yeah, I'd never experienced anything like it.
Yeah, and how do you deal with like sweating too? Can be tricky because you don't want to sweat too much, right? And let your layers freeze, and you have to. I mean, you must be constantly taking off layers and putting layers on, right?
Yeah, you are, and that's just part of the course, really. You just know that you can never get it right, but you'll always be slightly too hot, too cold. But you just need to regulate and keep them on and off. And the trick is to get your layers on before you get cold, so that your layers are keeping you warm as opposed to trying to warm you up. But yeah, the guy at the Jalandi Hot Springs, actually, he gave me a big pair of gloves, which kept me warm. So I had 2 pairs of gloves on at that point. I had some inners and then some big wool gloves on the outside.
Yeah, and this Jalandi Hot Springs, it's kind of that it's very unexpected, right? It's just, can you just
Yeah, it is. It's in the middle of nowhere, and you just come out. And I don't know if you've ever seen the film The Shining, but it reminds me of that. It's just that kind of hotel in the middle of nowhere, and these weird long corridors with sort of orange and green wallpaper, and quite dimly lit light bulbs. It's a very surreal place. I don't know what it's like in summer, but in winter it was absolutely dead.
yeah. I remember passing that place in the summertime, and no cars in the drive. It looked like it was deserted basically. And I arrived at like 10 a.m. and I was like, hot springs out here? That can't be right. Like, how is there a hot springs out here? Is this a joke? And for some reason, I just kept going. It was early on in the day, and I felt like I wanted to cycle, and I was pretty sweaty, I think, and hot, and I was like, okay, I don't really need a hot spring right
Yeah.
now. But it was like, it was the most like, is this an illusion? Am I
Yeah.
hallucinating from the altitude or something? That was the feeling that I got passing by Jalandi Hot Springs.
Well, the thing with me, it was my savior because I knew I was going there and I knew I could warm up. But because I got there at night, the lights, I saw them from a long way off. And I was just cycling along, and these lights just wouldn't get any closer. And I'd cycle after what felt like a couple of hours, and these lights were just always on the horizon. So I had that kind of hallucinogenic experience as well.
Oh my gosh, the distances just play tricks on you in the Pamir, right?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
remember like just staring at Caracol Lake for hours and hours and just thinking to myself, okay, I'll be there in an hour. And then an
Yeah.
hour later, it's like, it looks like it's in the same distance away from me. Okay, 2 hours maybe, and then 2 hours, it's maybe just a little bit bigger. And then before you know it, like 6 hours have passed, and you're just frustrated and like, when is the next town gonna come? Come on,
Yeah.
in some shelter.
Yeah, it's a big place, a place of big skies and big mountains and just big open scenery. I'd love to go back actually in the summer and experience it.
Yeah, so tell us about the struggle on the Pamir Highway with the elephants or the elements and
Yeah, I mean, winter cycling is hard and it's tough, and it can drain you mentally, because just nothing is easy, and the roads up there are not easy to ride on either. If they're not covered in snow, then they're very hard packed and corrugated. And I'd got over this climb called Akbaital, which is the highest point, and I was thinking, all right, I'm going to roll all the way downhill to the next village. And I had that in my head that, okay, I'd done the hard part of the day, was over. And then I started cycling downhill, and then there was a big headwind, which was slowing me down. And then this corrugated road, which was horrible to cycle over. And my freewheeling descent had quickly turned into an absolute grind again for another 40 kilometers. And there was this little hill to climb back up, and it wasn't much, but it just broke me. And I got off the bike and I had a big tantrum. And it sort of shows where my mental state was at that time, that, a small little hill, a rise of say 10 meters could tip me over the edge. But that's sort of where I was at the moment. And I had a big tantrum and had a Snickers bar, and I think that gave me a bit of energy. And then just over the top of this rise, then you could see down to Caracol. Suddenly the wind changed for whatever reason and started blowing behind me, and the road turned into tarmac, and it just had this massive outpouring of emotion because I'd strived all day and on really tough roads on my own in the cold, And suddenly I finally had this freewheeling descent. And I got to think, oh no, wait, I'm so grateful to be here and to be traveling in this amazing part of the world. And all the decisions that I've taken over the last 6 months, giving up my job and my girlfriend and my house and everything has led me to this. And all those decisions are the right ones. And I'm just so happy to be here. And I did get quite emotional on the bike there, just freewheeling down and just thinking, well, I'm so lucky to be here. So yeah, it's the emotions of the mountains sharpened by the physical exertions of cycling through the panniers.
Yeah. I think when you're in a place that you really, really kind of dreamed about for a long time, when you're actually doing it and you've accomplished something, that you push yourself beyond your limits of what you think is possible. I think you can have some of those, what I like to call like peak experiences. I remember being in my tent and on my last night in Ethiopia, and I would always, for years and years, thought about, oh, Ethiopia, it sounds like such an amazing place to visit. But then you hear these stories of how hard it is. And, in books, like we mentioned, Alistair Humphreys, he mentions like how it was the worst place because of stones and everything. And I remember at the last night in my tent, just being like, wow, I actually did it. And I was sick. I had some weird virus. And then I just had this outpouring of emotions. And it was the strangest feeling I'd ever had. It was like, wow, I've accomplished this, but I'm sick. And I'm happy at the same time, even though I'm in this physical pain and have this high fever. And it was just, I don't know how to describe it, but it was like a sense of awe that I've never had before.
And I think the combination of the physical with the mental as well leads to that, and the achievement as well. That was very much it for me. Is that was the highest point of the road, and I knew if I could get over that, then I could complete the whole Pamir Highway. And it was just getting that realization was just amazing. But you have to earn it. You've got to go through the week of tough cycling beforehand to experience that.
Yeah. And that's that place too. It's just so beautiful. I mean, nature can do that too, right? If you're just in a beautiful place, you look around and you're like, how does this place even exist? There's a lake, beautiful lake in front of you. There's snow-capped mountains, and people are so nice and hospitable. It's just, it's like a dream world. Like, is this real? You have to pinch yourself. I find myself pinching myself a lot of times, but yeah. So anyway, those are some of the most memorable parts of trips, huh?
And the moments we live for when we do these trips.
For sure. And then you get to Karakol, and then you have a rude awakening with some AK-47 armed men. Tell us.
So it's a curious thing up there is Tajikistan borders China, and there's a big border fence, but the border fence doesn't line up with where the border is on your map. And it turns out there's some diplomatic arrangement that Tajikistan owed China some money, and I think China said, well, we'll write off the debt if you just give us a bit of your country. So they just extended the border fence 100 yards that way. So I found a place to camp next to this border fence. I'm thinking, all right, well, I don't know. My map says I'm still in Tajikistan. It's fine. Pitched up my tent. And looked over towards the village, and this torch goes on, and I thought, some kid playing around with a torch or something. Leave him be. I'll go back to bed. And then I'm sitting in my tent, and lo and behold, I hear some footsteps approaching. Unzip it, and there's 3 men with AK-47s, border guards saying, "You can't camp here. You're in China, mate." which was a bit of a shock. And they were like, well, why aren't you in a hotel? And I said, well, I want to camp. And again, if we're talking about things that people can't understand, that is something a lot of people can't understand. Why you'd want to sleep in a tent instead of being in a hotel, especially when it's cold and there's wolves around. But yeah, so I'll never forget opening the tent and seeing a barrel of an AK-47 in my face.
Oh my gosh. Wow. And what did you think when you opened that tent and you saw those AKs? I mean, like, whoa, like,
Yeah,
thought,
I was trying to work out what I'd done wrong. Who I'd annoyed or where I'd done. But I think they quickly realized I was not a threat. I was just a bit of a stupid tourist, and they let me go.
wow. Yeah, yeah, I had a similar experience in Xinjiang that I might have
Oh yeah,
where I was just camping behind some bushes not too far from a town, and then in the middle of the night, like five guys, I see five flashlights in the distance, and thought, okay, some villagers are
yep.
messing around, and then the lights, they get closer and closer to the tent, and okay, they found me. Maybe they're just curious, they don't see a guy on a bike in this small town in Xinjiang, and lo and behold, yeah, AK-47s, like right in the middle of the night. And then they just started going like this, like pointing to their throats and making knife motions, like slitting their throats and pointing at me, like, you're gonna get killed. I'm like, you don't want to kill me, do you? You're not doing that to me. They're like, no, like, you will be killed if you sleep here.
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right. So they loaded me up in the truck and had to move 100 kilometers away to a hotel, but where I slept in the on the lobby couch at the end of, when it all was said and done.
Thinking about that motion, the throat slicing mime. When I was in Georgia in Spinetti, I met this guy in the middle of nowhere. Well, Valeri actually, and he was saying he kept doing this sign. I was like, what? He seems really friendly. Why is he doing that? But apparently in that part of Georgia, that means, we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to have fun up to here, we're going to be up to our necks in enjoyment.
All right.
So, yeah.
And I can picture it now, just making the neck slitting motion with the knife. Vodka.
Yeah.
You want to kill me with your vodka?
Yeah.
I want to have a good time.
Yeah. Don't know which you're going to get.
Yeah, right. Oh man, that's funny. Wow. So, all right. So you had your rude awakening. You were on your way the next morning. No wolves along the border, and then you continue along to Osh, right? So, how was the final stretch of the Pamir Highway?
Final stretch was surprisingly okay, actually. I think my body had got used to the altitude by that point. I was feeling good. I was feeling fit and healthy. My fitness was good, and yeah, I really enjoyed those last couple of days. Actually, I mean, they were cold, really cold. I had my coldest night at the tent when the guys came and found me. But apart from that, yeah, the scene was fantastic, and actually it was quite straightforward. A couple of big climbs, and then down to Osh and down to Kyrgyzstan. But the strange thing is Tajikistan and the Pamirs is actually quite dry in November, December. So the roads weren't too bad. But as soon as I got to Kyrgyzstan, wow, there was so much snow around. That was just a whole another challenge, it was a bit warmer, but way more snow, which meant my bike was slipping around, slip sliding about. You've got to be careful cycling down these roads. Camping in the snow is a whole another different thing. So it was sort of one challenge turned into another, really. The cold of the Tajikistan and the Pamirs versus the deep snow of Kyrgyzstan.
Wow. So you didn't fall off the bike though with the...
Oh, I fell off the bike. Yeah.
No,
you just get You just get used to it.
Wow. Okay.
It's kind of a controlled fall, you're slip sliding down. If you imagine you're going down a slope and there's just snow on the roads, I mean, there's not a lot you can do. You've got 1 foot out and 1 foot on the bike, and it's kind of like you're skating down, and you just have to make sure when you fall off, you're falling away from the passing traffic and not into it, and try and fall off and land on your feet or in, soft snow. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I fell off. It became a daily occurrence.
Oh my gosh. Or there's a lot of switchback roads too in Kyrgyzstan. You don't want to
Exactly.
fall off take a big tumble there down the mountains.
Absolutely not. No. So yeah, controlled slide, I think, is how I'd describe that riding.
Oh my gosh. So you didn't get any injuries or anything like that from falling off?
Nothing serious, no. The odd bruise, but that was all.
Wow. Lucky, huh? Man. Yeah. So anyway, invest in a good helmet. And
Yeah,
you didn't have any knee pads or anything, just a helmet, right, for protection, basically.
just a helmet and some warm layers. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Man. All right. So then you, from Osh, you went to Kazakhstan, right? And you took a break in Kazakhstan.
Yeah. So the winter cycling had really ground me down a bit. So I crossed Kyrgyzstan in about a week, which was, like I say, snowy and hard going. And then I eventually made it to Almaty in Kazakhstan, and that was in January. So I'd spent Christmas Day on the bike. I think my Christmas dinner was in a bus stop with Snickers and bread, which was, an experience. Not spent many Christmases like that. And then got to Almaty in Kazakhstan and decided it was time for some winter hibernation. So I got a job teaching English in the former capital there, and lived in Kazakhstan for 4 months.
Okay. And how was life in Almaty? How is that place as a city to live in?
I love Almaty. It's quite cosmopolitan for a Central Asian city. You've got the Russian influence, but the Kazakh influence as well, and lots of things going on. Lots of bars, restaurants, theaters, cinemas, all those sort of things. But you've also got the Tian Shan Mountains, which are right next to the city, so you can escape up into the mountains within like a 20-minute bus ride. So for me, it was the perfect city to live in, really. And I had a great time there. I had some Russian lessons while I was there, so I could speak to some of the locals. Tried my hand at skiing, did some running out in the mountains, did some mountain biking. It was a really pleasant 4 months, and a reminder of there are some benefits to living in a city and being in one place for a while. So yeah, it was nice contrast, really. Almaty, the Kazakh name for Almaty is Alma-Ata, which means grandfather of apples. And supposedly, the modern day apple was first grown on the slopes above Almaty there. Bit of trivia for you.
Wow, interesting. And you were there in the winter, so I assume you didn't get to try the apples then, because they were out.
I did not know, unfortunately. More horse meat stew, I think.
Okay, more reason to go back in the fall then, huh? Nice. So then let's skip ahead to Russia now. So you study Russian in Almaty, and then how was let's talk about Russian language. So how was your Russian language after studying there, and how was your journey with the Russian language?
Yeah, really, really enjoyable. I didn't know a single word of Russian when I left on this cycle, and it was something really surprising that I hadn't expected to learn, because I didn't even plan on going to Russia when I left, to start with. And I just found it opened up so many doors suddenly being able to communicate with local people, and they speak Russian in a lot of the ex-Soviet countries, so Kazakhstan, but also in Russia, and being able to converse with locals and just being able to understand them was just such an eye-opener. And I remember I'd studied for about 3 months in Almaty, not thinking I'd really got anywhere. But then suddenly when I was out on my own cycling and I had to speak it, suddenly it all clicked into place and I was able to have these conversations. And I went from, not being able to say anything to suddenly, being able to have proper conversations about more than just where the bread is in the supermarket. And I met a guy when I was in Almaty, and he was Russian, and I met him a few months later in Moscow, and he couldn't believe the progress that I'd made. But it just goes to show if you have to speak it, and that's all you can do every day, you will learn, and you will pick things up because that's what humans do. But I enjoyed the Russian language. It's quite a creative language, actually. You can play around with the word order quite a lot, and the sound is completely different. The writing, the Cyrillic writing is something completely different. So I really enjoyed the challenge of learning another language.
Yeah, wow. And so were you practicing, you were taking lessons in Almaty too? Are there a lot of English speakers in Almaty, or?
Yeah, so my circle of friends and people that I hung out with in Almaty were pretty much all English speakers. So I didn't get to practice that much. It was only when I was thrown out into the deep end of deepest, darkest Russia that I started to actually learn it. And a lot of times it's all about the battle, isn't it? Because they want to speak their English with you and you want to speak your Russian with them, and it's who's going to win that battle. And I was quite dogged and I'm just going to speak Russian, no matter what you say. But the good thing is a lot of people in Kazakhstan and Russia don't speak particularly good English. So quite quickly, my Russian became better than their English, which meant that it made sense for us to speak in Russian.
It's really satisfying, isn't it? I remember, same with my Korean journey. I'd have these battles of, okay, I really want to practice my Korean, but you want to practice your English. Let's see who's more stubborn here.
Yeah.
I would lose those battles like for the first year or so, but after that, man, they knew, like, okay, it's gonna be Korean.
Yeah.
Even if you were like an American guy that speaks a little bit of Korean, it's like we're speaking Korean together. It was like, that's it. That's the
great.
Stubbornness, right?
Yeah, it's needed.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah. So how was it in Russia? I mean, you're entering the biggest country in the world here. What were first impressions? You spent quite a bit of time there too.
I did, yeah, on and off, probably about 7 months in Russia, actually. When I went sort of in and out and in again. But my first impressions, I mean, there was a big sense of space and a sense of self-confidence that I hadn't seen in a lot of countries. I mean, Russia's a really old country. It's, very established. It's, been present in world historical events for the last however many centuries. So there was a certain self-confidence among the people and the places there. I got a real sense of the space of Russia, but it was a different kind of space to, say, the Pamirs or Kazakhstan or the deserts, where in those countries it felt quite empty, whereas in Russia it felt filled somehow. So, you had a lot of a big space, but it was filled with farms or crops and that sort of thing, or the Trans-Siberian Railway or things like that. So it was a big country, but filled somehow. I mean, I like the Russian people, and being able to speak to them helped quite a lot. On my first day, I needed some help sorting my phone out, and a woman just stopped to speak to me and helped me get that all set up for her. And I think Russians have a reputation of being cold and unfriendly, and there's certainly a bit of that on the surface. But once you scratch past that surface, they're quite warm and interested about your trip. I think a lot of parts of Russia just don't get many visitors and don't get many foreigners. So outside of the main, Moscow, St. Petersburg, Kazan, those sort of Western cities in the west of Russia, people are just not used to seeing tourists, especially those on bikes. So they are interested and they are friendly and they're interested about what you're up to. So yeah, my first impressions were how big the place is, which sounds obvious, but you feel it there.
Yeah, sure. And it's just amazing. You can be on take the train for how long? 4 days it takes to go to Vladivostok.
Oh, 7 days. Yeah,
7
it's a
days.
week from Moscow to Vladivostok. Yeah, and still be in the same country.
Yeah, a week on the train, it's just so hard to fathom. In a plane ride to, I'm going to Finland later this month actually, but it takes from Seoul to Finland, where you have to cross Russia, 12 hours in a plane, to cross Russia. That's just amazing how huge the country is. Just think about that.
And you can't really get your head around it, and to think about cycling across it as well, it just boggles the mind.
Yeah, sure. And wow. So the Russian people, what was their reaction to seeing you, especially a guy from England, speaking Russian, first of all, and cycling across their country, and then you were there in the winter too, cycling in the winter. I mean, it's just all hitting all these who you don't see Russian people cycling in the winter, right? In their own country.
No, you don't. I had quite a few different reactions to that from Russians. A lot of them almost angry, really. Just, angry at my stupidity for doing that. Why would you do that? Why are you here? Why are you cycling? Don't you know it's cold? Sort of anger at perhaps underestimating the Russian winter. But in general, the Russians I found really fascinating people, and I loved chatting to them about all sorts, including politics. Back in 2018, when I was there, it'd been about a year since there were some poisonings in Salisbury in the UK, which had a connection to the Kremlin and Putin. So I had quite a few strong debates about those, and Russians just saying, well, why would they do that? It makes no sense for Putin to do that. It was obviously not anything to do with Putin. Crimea had been annexed a couple of years before, so people were very interested in my views about that, actually. One thing I would say about Russians is most of them seem very up to date with current affairs and politics in a way that perhaps isn't the case in the UK. I think in the UK people tune out a lot. They just they're not so interested in politics and the news, whereas in Russia most people seem to watch the news. Most people have an informed opinion of what's going on. Now we can debate about whether how tainted that news and how full of propaganda, etc., that is, but at least they are up to date and they're willing to engage in that. So I had a lot of conversations with Russians about politics and Putin especially, and heard lots of different views. I heard those in support, those against, those who most people seem to support his foreign policy, but not his domestic policy, which I thought was interesting. Almost every Russian was happy that Crimea had become part of Russia, I would say. There was very few people I met who were against that. But aside from politics, I had lots of interesting conversations with Russians about England, about football, about life, about differences in, England versus Russia and our food and our culture and our welfare states. And I found the Russians to be very engaged people and great to have conversations with.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's what I found too. My experience was overall really positive with the Russian people. I remember I put my bike on the train to go to Novosibirsk on the train for like 30 hours, and I sat next to a woman that was just so patient, and I was learning the Russian alphabet and everything, and she would just sat there with me for hours and hours, correcting my pronunciation and helping me learn to read and everything on the train. I mean, it was just surprising, that definitely breaking stereotypes about the.
Absolutely. And Russian hospitality was a big surprise as well. I think it's more about they're cold to the outsider, but once you are friends with them, Russian people can't do enough to help you. I had, when I got to Novosibirsk, I needed a place to leave my bike because I was going over to the World Cup. And I had a random text from a guy who turned out to be a friend of a friend of a colleague of my father's. And there's just such a long chain of people away. But somehow the word had got out that I needed a place to leave my bike. And this guy just out of the blue texted me and said, my name is Kolya. I have space. Come and stay with me. And, he never met me in a million years, but because his friend had vouched for him and his friend, then he trusted them. And I found that a lot. And when I got to Vladivostok eventually, I must have had 6 or 7 offers of places to stay because, friends of friends who happened to be in Vladivostok were offering to put me up because they'd vouched for me because I was a friend of theirs. So, yeah, once you break that sort of initial coldness, the Russian people can't do enough to help you, or my experience anyway.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that's in Siberia too, right? Is considered part of Asia. That's something that's very important in Korea too, is just having a connection with somebody. In dating relationships, for example, like there's so many blind dates. Like, so if I know a girl that's single and Josh is single, okay, I'll introduce them and then they'll go on a date. And then it's like, okay, the girl, then we know she's trustworthy, like you can trust because there's a common person involved. So I wonder, it's very
I think it's a similar concept there.
Yeah.
They trust people's word.
For sure. Yeah, I remember cycling around Lake Baikal too, and then making some friends there. And then they said, we know somebody in Novosibirsk. And when you go to Novosibirsk, she'll show you around. And it was this really nice woman, and she was walking around Novosibirsk for hours and hours in high heels, like explaining everything to me. She's like, no, it's okay. I'm in high heels. It's okay. I'm walking here. And it was the connection though was key. She was just ready to take me around all day, like spending 2 days together, showing me everywhere.
I was thinking about that when I was there, and I guess because it is such a big country, but people seem to often have to travel to other cities, that maybe it's something to do with that if you end up in this other city far from where you are, then people are used to people arriving in cities and not really knowing anyone, so they're used to helping out with other people. Rather than traveling together.
Sure.
Perhaps.
Sure, yeah, it could be, right?
Because I get the feeling it wasn't just because I was a foreigner, but that Russians would help out Russians in those ways as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, same in Bangladesh too. Like I was traveling with some friends from Bangladesh, and there's a big cycling community, and if you're part of the cycling community, they just help each other out. Even though, and it wasn't necessarily because of me being a foreigner. It was like, you're a cyclist and you're going to this region that's kind of pretty far away. Okay, contact my friend. And I felt like they would have helped out any cyclist that was 500 kilometers away or whatever.
Yeah.
So could be, the distances, and they know, it's this guy is coming on a bike too. Like he's been through a lot, so maybe they want to become part of the adventure too, you know, hear some stories and yeah, hear a British guy speaking Russian.
Yeah, not the usual. I mean, I had so many offers of help. One particular group stands out when I was in. This was in later in the winter, and I had a really bad night, and I met these workmen who were just working on the side of the road, and they were busy building the road, and they called me up into their van and fed me food and gave me this garlic to eat because they said, "Oh, if you eat this whole garlic, you know, you'll be healthy. It's good for strength." And I was like, "Okay, fine." Not expecting it to be too bad. Put the whole garlic in my mouth and nearly choked to death on it because it was so spicy and hot and flavoursome. And one guy shouts out at the back, "Oh, he's been poisoned. It's Novichok." But they were just some random guys who are working on the side of the road. And I said, "Oh, I'm going to this next town. Do you know if there's a hotel there?" They said, "Well, you know, we're living there. That's where we live. Just come and stay with us." So I ended up being bundled in with these road worker guys, and there was sort of 8 of them to a 3-bed flat. And it turns out they'd all come from a different part of Russia and were doing a job out there. And I stayed with all these guys, and it was good fun getting to know them all and chatting to them. And they were just good, honest people who were, you know, trying to look after their families and get money on another side of Russia, and but had offered to help me out, and I just thought that was amazing. And I couldn't imagine it happening in the UK, you know, cycling past some guys who are working on the side of the road, saying, you know, come and stay with us. It just wouldn't happen.
Yeah, sure. That's really interesting. And then was that the guy that invited you to go snowmobiling?
Now that was another guy.
That was a different guy. Okay.
Yeah, there were so many people in Russia who are helpful. So my friend Edward, he met me at the side of the road, getting towards Vladivostok. And we had a chat, and he said, "Do you need anything?" And I was like, "Well, actually, I need a new inner tube for my tire. My inner tube had more plasters and patches on it than you know, a junior butcher who'd cut his hands open or something. You know, there were plasters and patches everywhere." And he got to Vladivostok and went around all the shops and bought these tubes for me and sent them on a bus going back up. And this bus pulled up, and I was cycling along. This bus pulled over. The guy called out and was like, "I've got your tubes. I've got your tubes." And he'd given them. And then when I got to Vladivostok, I stayed with this guy Edward, and yeah, he invited me to stay in his house in Kamchatka, which is up near Alaska, on that Russian part, which is just across the Pacific from Alaska. And we went snowmobiling for a week there, and he was just so generous and put me up. And you know, he never asked for anything in return. He just enjoyed the company and just enjoyed showing off his homeland really as well.
Wow. That's an epic story right there. Snowmobiling up by Alaska and in the Siberia.
Yeah, in Kamchatka, it's full of volcanoes. It's on the Pacific Rim. So we were snowmobiling up the side of these volcanoes while there are smokers coming out the top of them. It was crazy.
Wow. That's surreal. It must be a surreal experience. Wow. Awesome. And wow, so you were in also Siberia cycling in the winter. I mean, how was the cold? Was it different from the Pamir Highway, the type of cold that you felt there? Or were you kind of used to being in the cold after?
I don't think I'll ever get used to being in the cold. But there was a moment where I thought, well, can I do this? Should I take this on again? But I found a lot of comfort from what I'd been through in the Pamirs. I thought, well, you know, I'd got used to a bit of winter cycling from there. Not as bad and not as cold, but I'd done a bit there. So yeah, the cold in Russia was a different. I mean, the Pamirs for me was quite a short trip. Like I did Korog to Osh in 9 days. I really blasted through. Whereas the Russian part through winter was almost 2 months. It was about 6 weeks. So it was much more of a grind rather than one big burst of effort. And winter cycling is just everything grinds you down. It just takes longer, you know. In the morning, your water is frozen, so you've got to gather snow up to melt so you can cook something, some coffee. Everything takes ages because your hands are cold, so you have to take your gloves off, do something, put your gloves back on to warm them back up again. When you're striking your tent, you know, you have to clear all the snow off, and your hands are cold again. And then when you're on the bike, you go slower because you're in the snow. Also, you don't want to, we talked earlier about sweating. You want to just grind out the miles steadily on the bike in winter because you don't want to get too hot that you sweat, because then your sweat freezes and then you get cold again. So it's just all about grinding it out really steadily. When you eat, all your food is frozen, so you have to remember to keep some food close by you so it stays defrosted, so your body, you know, actually warms it up, putting your bread and your cheese in a pocket near your body. Getting water is just always an issue because it's just freezing all the time, so you have to go and find some rivers that are unfrozen, or remember to keep some close to you, or keep some in a flask that's going to stay cold. If you get a puncture, that just takes ages because, you know, you take the wheel off the bike, which takes ages because it's really fiddly and you've got cold hands, and then the tire could be frozen to the rim, so you have to get out your stove, put that on so you can actually melt the ice so you can get the tire off the rim. When you've finally done that, trying to feel for a little thorn or nail that's given you the puncture with cold hands is almost impossible. So you go round and round and round. So you have to get some toilet paper out and put that around the rim to try and actually see where it's catching. Then you get that out, and then trying to put a patch on the new tube because it's so cold that the glue won't set properly. It just goes on and on and on like this. So the cold is less of a individual. I had less individual moments of, oh, I'm really cold. It's more like just the effect of grinding everything down and making everything take so long. That's what it really got to me. And then at night, of course, when you're camping, all your food is basically trying to keep you alive, trying to keep you warm. So you cook a massive meal for tea, you eat it, and then you wake up in the morning absolutely starving because you've already burned all those calories, just keeping your body alive. And there was a real change of mindset in that that Russia chapter, because before, my trip had been about the cycling and the camping was almost secondary. Like the cycling was the hard bit, you know, there'd be a hill to climb up or cycling into a headwind. And then when I got into my tent, that was the respite and that was the rest from the trials. But in Russia, it was almost the other way around. The cycling was the easy bit because that was where I was warm, but it was the camping and, you know, the staying alive in the tent, that was the hard bit. So everything had kind of reversed. But yeah, it's hard to remember it now on a warm day in July, but it just grinds you down, that cold weather cycling completely.
Wow. And what was the most was there a task that you hated the most? Like, was it melting the water or setting up the tent, or is there something that you're like, oh, I have to set up this tent again, it's going to take me forever? Or what was the most?
Yeah, probably taking down the tent actually in the morning, because I'd be lying in my sleeping bag and I wouldn't want to get up because it's cold and it's the last thing you want to do. And you know you've got to get going. And setting up the tent, you know, you've been cycling all day, so you're actually a bit warm. Whereas in the morning, that's the end of the night. You're probably at your coldest that you're going to be all day. So your head is kind of muddled. You're tired anyway because you haven't slept, and your hands are really cold. And I just remember trying to take down this tent with this cold hands every morning was just an absolute trial. That was probably the worst part.
Wow. And like, how does, I remember when you came to see me in Korea, you had like this jacket that weighed like, I don't know how many kilograms, and these boots that were just like, I don't know how to describe them, but boots designed for a Siberian winter, basically. I mean, where did you get these clothes? And there was a good story behind them, I think, too.
Yeah, so the boots I bought from a market in Yakutsk, actually, which is one of the coldest cities in the world. I've gone and visited it. They were lined with fur and just really warm. But I'll be honest, the Russians clothed me quite a lot. By the time I finished and got to Vladivostok, I think I could have outfitted my whole outfit with clothes that Russians had given me, just being really generous. The coat was fantastic. I was camped outside this town called Abluchia, which is on the Trans-Siberian Railway, and I'd pitched my tent, and I was getting lazier and lazier about being out the way because I thought, oh, no one will be around this time of night anyway, and in this cold. But some people found me, and they came down and saw me, and I explained what I was doing, and then they went on their way. And then about 10 minutes later, another car arrived and said, oh, my mates just saw you. You can't sleep out here tonight. Come on, come and stay with me. And I thought, well, that's really generous. Thank you. Turns out this guy works on the Trans-Siberian Railway as an engineer. So the trains come in and he fixes all the problems that they might have, and he's a sort of mechanic there. And before I went, he gave me his old Trans-Siberian Railway overcoat and trousers, sort of salopettes, which were lined with, fur and were super warm. And they were last year's models, so I think he'd been given some new ones. So he just had them lying around in his cupboard, and he gave me this jacket and these trousers, and they were just so warm. I mean, they're designed for a guy who's working on the trains, who's going to be outside all day, so they were really warm. But they just sorted me right out. It was like being clothed in a duvet. It was that warm. But that was not it. I mean, another guy gave me a gilet for his beer company, Baltica Beer, and some t-shirts as well, which I think you've got one of them, George, if I remember correctly. Yeah. Another guy gave me some really warm socks because he said, your socks are not thick enough. Another guy gave me a knife. He was like, can I have a look at your knife, please? And I showed him, and he's like, this is not a knife. This is not a knife. This will not do. And gave me this really nice knife with sort of an ivory handle on it. I couldn't believe it. So I think the Russians were trying to clothe me and make sure that I survived.
They're like, man, you're sleeping outside, riding your bike out here. You're gonna need this more than I will. Like, let me just give you like everything I have. See these noodles here? Like, there's more in my house than like anything. Huh?
With food, I had hats, I had gloves, I had socks, I had trousers, t-shirts, gilets, everything.
Yeah. And then when you came to my place in Seoul, I remember you had a bunch of stuff that, like, your t-shirt you gave me, a pair of sweats that I still use to exercise in the winter too. You gave me a pair of boots, which I think maybe you got them in Russia too. But anyway, the boots, they were too small for me, but I found a good owner for them. So
great.
I know that a good friend of mine, like, he just came to Korea and got into hiking and was really enthusiastic, but he didn't have any hiking boots. And it's like, here, try these on. And they fit him perfectly. And he's from Pakistan, and he really wants to go hiking in the Hindu Kush there.
Amazing, yeah.
So maybe those boots will be stomping around in the Hindu Kush in northern Pakistan one day. And as you can see here, I'm drinking out of this tin. I don't know if you recognize this, but I take it on my, I use it for teaching. I use it for working out. If I'm going on a hike, of course, it keeps my beverage warm, and I brought it with me on the trip back to the United States, and I thought it would keep me hydrated during this interview too, and it's doing a great job.
Perfect. I was trying to remember what happened to that.
You've been looking for it, huh?
Yeah.
Maybe you could use it since you're roaming around the mountains
Yeah.
UK recently, huh? Anyway, if you want it, you're gonna have to come back to Korea, and I'll give it back to you if you want.
That's fine by me. No, it's yours, man.
Anyway, yeah. So the Russians, that hospitality is something that sounds like is taken to another level, especially in the winter there.
Yeah.
Wow. And how would you describe, what kind of food are you cooking in the winter in Siberia in your tent?
Just a lot of it. So I started living off this stuff called grechka, which is kind of buckwheat, I think it would be the English name. Which is a grain that cooks quite quickly in boiling water. So I would have kilos of this stuff and boil it up every night and have it with mayonnaise and a bit of carrot or onion. And then during the days, lots of bread. You've got to start thinking about things that won't freeze. So, you can't be, fruit and veg doesn't work particularly well because, a frozen tomato is not a lot of fun to eat. So you have to start thinking, okay, well, what food is going to be okay if it's frozen and reheated? So yeah, in the morning, lots of oatmeal, just loads of oats, with this thing called zgushonka, which is condensed milk. So I got into a routine of oats for breakfast, lots of bread for lunch, and then this buckwheat grechka for tea. It wasn't particularly healthy, but it had a lot of calories, which is really the main thing that you need. Occasionally, I would find a roadside cafe, once every few hundred kilometers, which was an absolute godsend because they would have warm food and fruit and veg and healthy meals. And in those places, I would have borscht, which is this beetroot soup, and a big plate of meat and potatoes or a stew of some sort, and then also always pancakes for dessert after that. And I would just eat scores of this stuff and wash it down with cups of tea, anything to warm you up and fill you up.
Wow. So every few hundred kilometers, you'd run into one of these cafes. So
yeah. So I feel like, I don't know, 4 or 5 days cycling. The problem is that I was going along a road that the stops were built for those driving. So if you're driving or in a truck, a few hundred kilometers is reasonable to, stop every 4 or 5 hours or so. But obviously when you're on the bike, that's quite a few days. So you're really out in the middle of nowhere.
Wow. So when there's no cafe, then you're living off of like grechka and bread, and that's it. Like no sauce, no beans, nothing, no condiments, maybe just some mayonnaise.
Yeah, a bit of mayonnaise with the grechka, bit of salt and pepper perhaps, and maybe a bit of, like I say, sweetened condensed milk to go with the porridge to sweeten that up.
Wow.
But to be honest, when you're cycling that much and you're that hungry, any meal is a 5-star meal.
Yeah. They say hunger is the best sauce, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's all it takes is some hunger. Wow. All right. So yeah, let's. Do you want to take a break for a second?
Yeah,
I'll run to the bathroom real quick, and
yeah.
and we can talk about. I'll put on pause.